invite some more celebratory remarks this evening, and then we will close the evening with more time for conversation and more delicious food and refreshments. We're both delighted and honoured to hear now from His Excellency Professor Boediono. Professor Boediono is Professor of Economics at Gadjah Mada University and is the former Vice President of Indonesia. Prior to this appointment, Professor Boediono held a wide range of senior positions in the Indonesian government. He was Governor of the Bank of Indonesia, the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, the Minister of Finance, and the head of the National Development Planning Agency, Bappenas. Professor Boediono studied in Australia at the University of Western Australia, at Monash University, and then took his doctorate in economics at the University of Pennsylvania. And in 2013, we had the great honour to award him an honorary doctorate from this university. But perhaps the most important part of his distinguished professional record is that in the years 1971, 1972 and 1978, he worked as a research assistant at the Indonesian project.
Thank you, Professor Taylor. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I would like to thank the Indonesian project for inviting me to come to Canberra to join you all to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the project. The Indonesian project has a special resonance for me, and I think for many of us who are here tonight, who at some stage in our careers have come to interact with the project. As Professor Taylor mentioned, I began to get involved in the project in a humble way quite early, 1971, as a research assistant. Subsequently, I became an occasional contributor to the BIS, occasional visitor to the project, as well as a member of the BIS editorial board. And since my return to Indonesia, I have attempted, whenever opportunities arise, to lend support to the project's activities in Indonesia that may involve interaction with members of the academia, or the government, and often both. If I had to make a personal balance sheet on my association with the project, I have little doubt that I have taken away from it more than I have contributed with. Not only have I benefited a great deal professionally, but in the process, I have gained an invaluable side benefit, namely lasting friendships with many of Indonesia's project's alumni, if I could call them. Something which I always highly value. Ladies and gentlemen, on an occasion like this, I think it is fitting to pay tribute to the late Professor Heinz Arndt, the initiator of the Indonesia project. Looking back over the past 50 years, it appears that he has bequeathed us not just a project, but in fact, a time-tested institution. And those who receive the baton from Heinz to subsequently navigate the project through administrative, financial, diplomatic challenges. I mentioned here Peter McCauley, Elvil, Chris Manning, and Karni Budi, Reso Sudarmo, also deserve our appreciation. Of course, we must also recognize that the contribution of many scholars, graduate students and policymakers from Australia, Indonesia, and other countries who have made the Indonesia project a premier institution, research institution on the Indonesian economy as it is now. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been commented that the Indonesia project has proved to be one of the more stable elements in the relations between our two countries. I would readily agree with that view. The established network of the Indonesia project alumni, something that is often underappreciated, appears to be robust enough to weather the ups and downs in our diplomatic relations. I understand that initially the project was conceived to be an endeavor to systematically understand Indonesia. As it turned out, it has become an effective vehicle for strengthening mutual understanding between our two countries. Viewed in this light, the project should get continued support it deserves. Finally, let me wish the Indonesia project and all the staff a very happy golden anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Boediono. We're now delighted to welcome back to the ANU Professor Pangestu. Professor Pangestu is the former Indonesian Minister of Tourism and the Creative Economy, and also a former Indonesian Minister of Trade. Currently, she's Professor of International Economics at the Faculty of Economics, University of Indonesia, and since 2012 has been a high-level eminent person at UNCTAD and a member of the Leadership Council for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. She is well known to us here because she's also, we're very proud to say, an alumna of this university as a graduate in economics with honours and with a Master of Economics from the ANU before moving to the University of California to take her PhD in economics. We had the pleasure of awarding an honorary doctorate to her in 2013. Professor Pangestu, thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a great pleasure for me to be here tonight to join the celebrations of the golden anniversary of the Indonesia project. I think all of the previous speakers have spoken about how great this project is, and in a way, calling it a project is a bit of a misnomer. You tend to think of projects as something that lasts for a short period. But this is a project that has become an institution, has become the most premier, a place to have Indonesian studies. And this was something that was conceived 50 years ago by the founders, like Professor Heinz Arndt and the Australian government at the time. It sort of indicates a vision that was really way before its time in recognizing the importance of Indonesia and understanding Indonesia, and in the context of a strong Australia-Indonesia relations. I would like to phrase my remarks in my personal journey with the Indonesia project. I think Veronica said that there were many fathers and mothers of success of the Indonesia project. I'd like to think of myself as the child of the Indonesia project, because I have literally grown up with the Indonesia project. I would like to celebrate my own almost 50-year journey with the Indonesia project as a reflection of what the Indonesia project is all about. I first came to Canberra actually in 1966 because of the Indonesia project. My father, like him, was the first Indonesian researcher to join the Indonesia project as a regular staff member in the economics division of the Research School of Civic Studies. So my early memories of the Indonesia project is really of playing hide and seek in Coombs building and getting lost. And the real main point of this bit of history is how the Indonesia project, from its inception, from the beginning, wanted to involve Indonesians in their program work, a tradition which continues till today. Since 2001, we have had Dr. Budi Rekso-Sudarmo as a research fellow and as the head of the first Indonesian head of the Indonesia project in 2011. The second phase of my growing up with the Indonesia project was when I studied economics as an undergraduate at the ANU. So I was still an undergraduate, but because of my special connection with the Indonesia project, I was able to go over there and have conversations, have discussions, and I was able to write my honors thesis on Indonesian unemployment with Peter Macaulay. I still remember coming to Coombs for consultation. And during this time, of course, I would interact with a number of the PhD students who were there, such as Chris Manning and Hal Hill, and of course, the revered Professor Heinz Arndt. I was actually quite fearful of Professor Arndt, because I had heard stories from my father about how my father was working under him. It was quite fearful, but he was actually a very kind man, who I remember gave us kids at that time when we first came many things inherited from his own children. It was Heinz who also encouraged me to do my PhD in the US rather than continuing in the ANU to widen my horizon. And I think he was giving me the right advice at the time. And the first time I met Pak Boediono was also in Bruce Hall. Probably Pak Boediono doesn't remember, because I was a lowly undergraduate and you were, I think, writing your thesis at the time when sitting at the Indonesian project. And this bit of history marks another incredible contribution of the Indonesia project. Its role and involvement with generations of Indonesians studying and getting guidance, mentoring and learning at this excellent place. Many Indonesian students have come through here, graduated, and have been very successful, such as Muhamad Basri, who will speak next. And it's a tribute. I mean, when Veronica reminded us that Pak Boediono was actually a research assistant at the Indonesia project. So research assistants of the Indonesia project can become vice presidents. So to all of you research assistants. There are, I believe, 10 PhD students now at the Indonesia project. The third phase of my growing up with the Indonesia project is passing, after I graduated with my PhD, was my first test as a newly graduated economist. At that time, if you were going to be anyone, if you were going to be recognized as a good Indonesian economist, you have to do a survey of recent developments. That's your first test. I really was very nervous and quite stressed out with this first test. But then we all got this sheet, I think it was still typed by Heinz. You know, the instructions and the framework and the data you must collect, who you should meet, the framework for writing a survey of recent developments. I did this in 1987, and I had to come for the, I don't know whether you do that still now. One of the things you have to do is you have to come here for 2 weeks, and you literally get locked up until you finish your draft. And you have to give a seminar, and Heinz normally, I think, always attends. And that was really, I was very, very stressed out. Again, you know, I have this sort of scary memory about Heinz. It was my biggest fear, and I was very nervous. To my relief, I passed the test. And so I felt I had made it because I had finally done this test by writing the survey of recent development. The fourth stage is, of course, I grew up as an economist. I developed a professional and institutional relationship with myself and Hadi Susastra, with CSIS. We did many things. CSIS is the publisher of BIS edition in Indonesia. We've had many seminars, conferences, joint research, such as the regional economic analysis or reviews that actually, again, there was a guideline from Heinz typed up how you should do these regional surveys. And there's a great picture in the book, somewhere in the middle, of this whole group of economists from all over the region. There was Mahendra Kumara in that picture. And it was published as a book, of a survey of all the regions. Another memorable seminar was after the crisis and going into the democratic period. I think it would have been around 1999, where I attended, and a number of people attended, and a number of them ended up in government, including Yusuf Kala. Finally, the final stage was when I was in government. Whenever I needed help and input, the people that I naturally turned to were those who have spent their lives studying and analyzing Indonesia. Here's the wealth of knowledge and expertise that you really feel very comfortable coming here, getting advice. So through my 7 years as a trade minister, we did various studies on trade with Hal, and then trade and labor with Chris, and we spent a lot of time talking about evidence-based policy making, all the good things that I learned in ANU and had to actually implement. We can have another conversation about how successful I was at implementing that, but certainly what I learned and what I experienced and what I know from the Indonesia project really helped. And I spent a lot of time thinking about capacity building when I was on the outside before I came into government. Then when I came into government, I knew what I wanted in capacity building, in the sense that it had to be the right people. I wanted quality input, I wanted capacity building, and I knew, really, that the recommendations from my friends at the Indonesia project was not only grounded in deep knowledge, experience, and sound analysis, but was also worked full-heartedly with Indonesia's development interests in mind. You did it with your heart, not just, I'm a consultant working on this project and here are my recommendations. It's none of that. You worked with your heart because you genuinely, passionately felt for Indonesia's development. And this is not basa-basi. This is not being polite. This is the truth. I really knew I could count on my Australian friends. And finally, Indonesia and Australia relations, as all of you have mentioned, have had its ups and downs. Usually it's at the top government level though. But the Indonesia project and its understanding of Indonesia has been the constant, the stable rock in the relationship. And it says something for the rock that grows stronger and stronger in the last 50 years. And on behalf of the Indonesian government and the Indonesian academic community, and all of us Indonesians who feel like Australia is part of them, I would like to thank ANU, Indonesia Project, the Australian government, for its continuing support of the Indonesia project. And if you believe my growing up with the Indonesia project as just a microcosm of the impact of the Indonesia project, I think you can well appreciate all the warm feelings that we have for the Indonesia project. So finally, I hope that the Indonesia project will continue to grow with the changing times, broaden its base and networks, continue to contribute to the understanding of Indonesia, and we live on for another 50 years and more. And maybe I'll still continue to grow with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emily. We're delighted to hear next from Dr. Muhamad Basri. Dr. Basri is a former Indonesian Minister of Finance, and prior to that, he was chairman of the Investment Coordinating Board of the Republic of Indonesia. Currently, he's chair of the financial institution Indonesia Infrastructure Finance, as well as serving as a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University of Indonesia. He obtained his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Indonesia, but we're very proud that he holds a Master's of Economic Development and a PhD in economics from the Australian National University. Welcome back to ANU, Basri, please. We're keen to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening for all of you. It is an honor for me to speak before all of you in this special occasion on the golden anniversary of the Indonesia project. And in this great opportunity, I would like to share some of my experience and also my view regarding the Indonesia project. But before that, let me start with some questions actually. Fostering and maintaining a study center like Indonesia project is not an easy task because the study center focuses on a country in which very vibrant, very dynamic, and a lot of uncertainties. So it's similar like we are dealing with the moving target. So I was wondering why the late Professor Arndt was interested in Indonesia at the time. If I were Professor Arndt at the time, probably I would do country studies besides Indonesia. Because I recall, as I mentioned in my talk yesterday, in Asian drama, Gunnar Meder mentioned about Indonesia as a country. We had a very pessimistic future because not able to move out from the low traffic equilibrium because they are not able to implement the modern development strategy. And I could find a similar tone in the Survey of Recent Development written by late Professor Arndt and also late Pangestu and the BIS in 1966. But the reality shows that the opposite of that. Indonesia project survived and Indonesia remain exists. And I recall back in 1998, I was a student here. Indonesia project also conducted a similar conference. And all of us were also very pessimistic about Indonesia. We are talking about balkanization, possibility of the bloodshed, not ready for the direct presidential election, economic collapse, no hopes for Indonesia. But 10 years after that, we become member of the G20. So we move from zero to become hero, while other countries in the world have the problem of the global financial crisis. So this is a country, it's really, I would say that rather confusing. So I remember that, my friend Jim Castle, I'm quoting Jim Castle, he said that Indonesia is a disappointing country. It disappoints the optimists who keep expect that the country can grow by more than 8 to 9%, but it also disappoints the pessimists who keep saying this country may collapse every day. Yeah, and I think that's the reality. And people at the Indonesia project at the ANU, this project is perhaps not the first study center for Indonesia. It was established way after the Cornell Modern Indonesia project, and also after the Indonesian Study Center in Melbourne was initiated by late Professor Jamie Mackey, and later on Jamie also got involved in the Indonesia project. And many analyses that made by colleagues here at the ANU not always necessarily made a right prediction about what will be the future of Indonesia. And similar to other colleague academics, they made a mistake. But the more important thing is the persistency and the consistency to produce the good quality of work. And I think for this reason that this Indonesia project emerged has become one of the most authoritative center for the Indonesian study in the world. And I would say that Indonesia project is really centered of the history of the debate of the intellectual in Indonesia. So let me share my personal experience about two anecdotal evidence. It was back on 2005. I was sitting in a dining room in the house of the late Professor Boediono. So I was having lunch with Pak Boediono and also Jamie Mackey. And they were discussing about all the things about the policy making process, the history of the Indonesian economic history, the policy making process. And one thing that I learned from this conversation is they mentioned so many names. I could not add a more value to the discussion. The only thing that I could remember is all the names they referred. It reminds me with my history class at my elementary school, because they were talking about Juanda, they are talking about Wiloko, they are talking all the peoples that become the name of the street in Jakarta. So definitely, this is really part of the history, the intellectual debate of the Indonesian policy-making process. The second anecdotal evidence, I hope you don't mind now if I share this story. It was back on end of September 2004. It was October perhaps about a few weeks before President Yudhoyono was inaugurated as president. So I was summoned by President-elect Yudhoyono at the time to his house at Chatib. He told me that, Dede, in the next couple of days, I would like to go for the oral examination for my PhD. And as the presidential-elect, I need to get someone who really credible on Indonesian economic, topics. And I'm thinking about someone who really has the authority. Is Professor Hal. Can you contact him? So I tried to contact Hal, but unfortunately for another reason, Hal couldn't make it. And then I tried to contact Emeritus, and Emeritus flew from London to Jakarta to become the examiner of the president-elect Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. And this small story, the short story, to shows that all these authoritative people regarding the Indonesian study has to do with the Indonesian project. And I think this is very important, and I would say that it's hard for me to imagine that other center study in the world could achieve that kind of achievement. And this kind of achievement would not be possibly happen without dedication, spending uncountable hours for do the Indonesian study, and also will not be possibly happen without the brilliant lineup of the brilliant colleagues at the Australian National University. And I would say that Indonesia should thank the Australian National University and Indonesia project for this kind of contribution. And last but not least, I wonder when Ibu Mary mentioned it should be called as a project because already 50 years. And why was this project could survive for 50 years? So let me give my caveat. Perhaps the reason behind it is doing study on Indonesia is very dangerous because it is addictive. Thank you.
We're going to hear next from our ANU colleague, Emeritus Professor Hal Hill. Hal currently holds the H.W. Arndt Chair of Southeast Asian Economies in the Arndt-Corden Department of Economics. From 1986 to 1998, Hal headed the Indonesian project, and for most of that time also was the editor of the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies. Hal is the author or the editor of 15 books and 140 academic papers and book chapters. And so it's not surprising that he's also the most widely cited scholar in the world on the Indonesian economy. Many professors aspire to be number one in their field, and Hal, who is a very modest person, has actually achieved that. I think it's also significant that his scholarship is distinguished by a real commitment to informing the quality of public policy. And so it's also not surprising that Hal has been very much sought after for his advice and has served as a consultant to the Australian government, the Indonesian government, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and several United Nations agencies. Hal is justifiably one of the fathers of the Indonesian project, and we look forward to hearing from him now. Congratulations, Hal.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for those very kind, far too generous words. I appreciate it. And good evening, everybody, especially to our distinguished guests and speakers. So I'm speaking also partly on behalf of the Indonesia project and its head, Dr. Boediono Sudama, who'll speak shortly, and also the wonderful people who are part of the project. Conscious also that I'm between you and cocktails, so I better watch out. I want to just express our deep thanks to Chancellor Gareth Evans, also for particularly robust book launching. You launched one of mine once, Gareth, and I'll never forget it. It was a brilliant speech. So thank you very much to Vice Chancellor Young, thank you very much. Secretary Peter Varghese, thank you. Nadjib, very kind of you. And to our dear Indonesian friends, Pak Budi, Ibu Mari, and Pak Dede, who kindly made the trip to Canberra in the middle of winter. Also, I want to acknowledge the presence of former heads of the project, Peter McCauley, one of my PhD dissertation committee members actually, Chris Manning, long-time editor of the BIS, Ross McLeod, and now official but very independent historian, Colin Brown, somewhere there he is. Thank you very much, Colin, for a wonderful book. And also I want to thank Dean Veronica Taylor for doing a wonderful job emceeing. So, as academic enterprises go, few could have been more audacious or improbable than the Indonesia project. Arguably, it was a one-off accident of history that succeeded brilliantly. In some ways, a little bit like this university was arguably a one-off act of history as well, that succeeded brilliantly. It was founded to work on the Indonesian economy when that country's economy had been in a state of more or less continuous decline for about 50 years. We know that, by the way, from an ANU economic historian, Pierre van der who may be here this evening. It was a time also when the economics profession was completely sidelined. I remember once talking to the late Babat Sadli, one of the key policy makers under President Suharto, and Babat Sadli told me, during 1964 and 65, I basically stayed home and read novels. There wasn't much else to do. It was also a time when the Indonesian Central Bank's note printing press broke down owing to overuse. It was also the time when probably the most reliable and most watched economic statistic was the rupiah US dollar exchange rate on the black market. So this was not the time really to launch a serious project on the Indonesian economy. Credit must go to ANU and its founders, who explicitly included developing, as part of its core mandate, work on the Asia-Pacific economies and societies and politics. The project was, I guess, also founded at a maybe a more visionary and generous era for universities, when leaders could afford to dream big and take risks, and we didn't yet have the dreaded KPIs coming at us every year. As with so many other bold and far-sighted Australian initiatives internationally, as has been by other speakers, credit goes to the first head of the ANU Asia-Pacific Economics Group, Sir John Crawford, and then for his appointment of one of the most remarkable, visionary and energetic academics this country's ever seen, that is Heinz Arndt, and Heinz is essentially the reason why we're all here tonight. His legacy remains with us in so many respects, more than just the buildings and the rooms named after him, but the intellectual legacy which he bequeathed to us. Incidentally, that intellectual legacy is now extending, I think, to the fourth generation of PhD students. That is, some of our current PhD students were sent to us by the third generation of PhD students from Indonesia who we as a second generation had actually supervised. So we're kind of into the fourth generation already from Heinz's days. We're also currently celebrating the flagship of the project, 50 years of the Bulletin, as mentioned earlier, with the imminent arrival of the August issue. I think it's almost always been on time. Heinz Arndt, of course, set the example of punctuality, as Nadjib mentioned in his speech. The editors decided on this occasion to mark the event, the special event of 50 years, with some specially commissioned papers on longer-term Indonesian development issues by some of our most famous contributors, including Mari Pangestu on international trade issues, Peter McCauley on infrastructure issues, Thomas Lindblad from Leiden on foreign investment, and Ross Garno on comparative analysis of resource booms. I want to just point out the project rested on 4 pillars, and I want to just briefly acknowledge those 4 pillars. Very briefly, I emphasise. The first has been the Asia-Pacific economics work, another area where the ANU has potentially has been able to claim potentially global top billing. This was with the illustrious figures led initially by Crawford and by Arndt, by Corden, by Garno, by Hughes, Drysdale, many others, some of whom are here tonight. The second has been the broader ANU Indonesianist community, and here it's hard to think of any other country study community at a university working better than it has at the ANU across so many disciplines in the social sciences and in the humanities. It's invidious to pick out individuals in that broader community, but the late Janjanaki was a crucial figure, I think, in the early years of that broader Indonesian work. Coincidentally, like Heinz, he was an Oxford PPE and had a kind of broad view of issues. And his successors at the wonderful Department of Political and Social Change, I think, are here tonight somewhere, and the hugely successful Indonesia Update series, which we have been organising since 1984, started by Peter McCauley and Jamie Mackey. The third has been the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, right from the very beginning, and particularly grateful therefore that Peter, you could come and speak to us, take time out to talk to us, and to his predecessors. And also, by the way, including some very distinguished ministers from that department, including our distinguished Chancellor at the moment. Colin's wonderful book reminds us of the fact that the department has been very important from the very beginning. And I just want to quote something which was from Heinz's original diaries. This is when Heinz was contemplating the Indonesia project in 1964, and this is from Heinz and Colin's book. So Heinz says, almost everyone I consulted advised against the effort. Until the situation improved in Indonesia, I was told research resources would be wasted there, and there was so much else we could do usefully in the region. Among the few exceptions was Sir Kees Shang, then the Australian ambassador to Indonesia. Later on the page, it's also noted, Heinz said perhaps some of the most significant support came from Sir Arthur Tang, then Secretary of the Department of then External Affairs, and some discussion about what Sir Arthur Tang did. So that connection has been extremely important, and we thank you, Peter, for joining us tonight. The fourth pillar has been, perhaps the most important of all, has been our distinguished colleagues and friends from Indonesia. You're right, Dad, we do get addicted, and we can't escape it. And this is one of close personal and intellectual friendships built up, as Murray and others have said, and Riphat would as well, since the 1960s. Indonesia is a remarkably open, welcoming, hospitable society, also profoundly tolerant of foreign scholars, sort of, coming in and sometimes meddling a bit. I've never had a bad experience in Indonesia, and I guess I've visited maybe 80 times in addition to living there. Quite simply, this project would not have been possible without the support that we've received from our friends. So we do thank our Indonesian friends deeply for their trust and for their friendship. By the way, just especially to the current generation of Indonesian PhD students, especially here, jangan lupa ya, kami mau bikin ANU Mafia. We want to build an ANU Mafia. I think we've already built it actually. We want to strengthen it. The Berkeley Mafia was the early period. We want to build this ANU Mafia. For those who don't know the connotation, Mafia in Indonesia has a good meaning, not a bad meaning. At least I hope so. So I know I speak for all my colleagues in saying we feel immensely privileged to be part of the enterprise. Among the group, we argue like crazy all the time, but it's always been in a very constructive, collegial way, the kind of manner that Heinz himself conducted himself in, which he would have wished. And it's really been a lifelong hobby for all of us. I think also it's worth noting there aren't many activities of genuine global importance for which universities on the periphery, and Australia is on the periphery, like it or not, can aspire to or even claim to be number one in the world as something really important. And I think we at the ANU like to claim that, or at least we can make that aspirational claim that we want to be number one on Indonesia outside of Indonesia itself. Now, looking forward, and let me sum up, I'm sure we can look forward to another very exciting half-century. The project, as has been noted, is already beginning to Indonesianise itself. The first Indonesian head, as we mentioned, is my great friend and colleague, Dr. Boediono. That's a very healthy process, and I think it will continue. Whether and in what form it remains at ANU, how much of it migrates elsewhere, including to Indonesia, is now in the hands of the next generation of very capable leaders, both here in Indonesia. So I leave it to them. One of the benefits of being an emeritus professor. I signed the role last week. But I want to just conclude with, in fact, the final words, the final couple of sentences of Colin's book, where I thought he summed up things very nicely. This is from Colin, page 110, Colin. It's a great book, by the way, this is Colin. In 1965, when the project was founded, Australian troops were stationed on the border with Indonesia to defend the newly founded nation of Malaysia. Over the years, diplomatic relations with Indonesia have waxed and waned, but the bilateral and international networks that the Indonesia project represents have not just endured but matured and thrived. The professionalism, mutual respect and trust behind this achievement may be intangible, but they have had impact and influence far beyond the project's modest finances and staffing. Believe me, modest financing is important, but beyond the modest financing and staffing, and are things to which all associated with the project can take pride. Thank you very much.
is his ability to identify talent. And so one of the things that's ensured the longevity of the Indonesian project has been its smooth and strong transitions in leadership. And so I'm very pleased now to invite remarks from Associate Professor Budi Resesudamo, our friend and colleague who is the current head of the ANU Indonesia project, and as you've heard, our first Indonesian to hold that role, something that we are truly delighted about. Budi is himself a distinguished scholar. He serves as the Vice President of the East Asian Association of Environmental and Resource Economics and is Vice President of the Indonesian Regional Science Association. Prior to joining us at ANU, he was a researcher at the Agency for Assessment and Application of Technology and the Inter-University Centre for Economics at the University of Indonesia. He has also been a lecturer in the graduate program in economics at the University of Indonesia and has been a Fulbright visiting fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and a postdoctoral associate at the University of Vermont. Amongst other things, Budi is the architect of this week-long celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Indonesia project, and so it's very appropriate that we hear from him at the close of this evening's celebration. Budi.
Your Excellency, His Excellency, friends and colleagues, on behalf of the Indonesia project, I would like to thank all of you to come to this event and for your generosity to spend some time with us. On behalf of the project, I would also like to acknowledge the right of the traditional owner of the land in which we celebrate this event. There are several institutions and people that I would like to thank tonight. First, I would like to thank the ANU, College of Asia Pacific, Prophet School, Coral Bell School, Department of Political and Social Change, the Arndt-Corden Department of Economics, for their long support to the project. The project also would like to thank the generosity of Australia Defence for its support that so far we can do what we do right now. The project also would like to thank ANU academics and other academics from Australian universities who has participated and contributed to the activity of the project. Without their contribution, the project wouldn't be able to survive this long. Many of our activities and the quality of our activities depend on the quality of their work and the intensity of their work. The project also would like to thank our Indonesian collaborator from various institutions in Indonesia, from University of Indonesia, Gajah Mada University, CSIS in Jakarta, Semeru, and a lot of other universities all over Indonesia. They all contribute to the project activities in Indonesia as well as in Australia. Right now, number of speakers, for example, in all Indonesia project activities, about 50% of the speakers are already Indonesian. The project also enjoy good relationship with other Australian institutions, like Chatib. We also enjoy good relationship with the Treasury, ONA, and other departments in Australia. And for tonight, I would like to thank particularly several people, Colin Brown, Liz Dresdale, and Beth Thompson, who has been able to produce a nice book, The History of Indonesia Project. The project really appreciate their effort and their willingness to spend time for this work. Special thank also for various volunteers. They're preparing this activity for the whole week. A lot of them you can see in the corridor. They work very hard, and the thing that I like the most is they're actually proud they work volunteering for the project. A special thanks to 3 professional staff of the project, Kate McClinton, Diana, and also Nuka, who worked very hard in preparing all these activities. I would like to say that again that all these project activities we wouldn't achieve what we achieved without all your support, and for that we would like to thanks and grateful for all your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Budi, and once again, warmest congratulations. This concludes the formal part of this evening. Thank you all so very much for being with us to celebrate 50 wonderful years for the Indonesia project. We've been looking back at the history of the project and all of the people who've been involved, but we're also looking forward. I'd invite you now to stay, to enjoy each other's company, to join us again in the foyer for some tea and coffee, and importantly, some birthday cake. Thank you again. Enjoy the evening.